the possibility to connect to those simple means again. So it can offer a way to also an optimistic and lively way. I think it's possible now, and it seems so odd and dark and frustrated. Everybody is so skeptic and annoyed and stuff, and people are less interested in art, which is understandable. But I think that there is something possible. I'm quite sure about that. After a long time of not finding my way and trying this and that and moving away from sculpture and going back to it, when I started to use the metal as a material, it turned out to become then very stable, and I stayed with the sculpture, and I stayed kind of most of the time with that material as well, since 20 years now. I have this interest in color. I had that always somehow. But now I do actually paint on the sculptures. The sculptures you see here, those are like the newest one I did so far. And here I literally paint with a brush on the sculpture. So I'm kind of painting again in this sense. But of course it's related and very clearly referring to that physical, three-dimensional entity. You know, I'm not just painting loosely. It could not be like a two-dimensional surface. You know, it is clearly a sculpture and a three-dimensional thing I'm painting on. And but I'm kind of painting in a way. I had the feeling that this area with the gallery I was in the beginning, that there was a certain understanding of an artist who is a doubtful, shaky individual, and the artwork is proof of that, you know. And I was a bit like that, but I could see already at that point that can't be everything. There is a simple physical aspect with the sculptures, and you have to deal with it. Otherwise, you would end up you will end up as a shaky individual, making shaky, fragile, emotional things. And I did not want only to do that. So, and that's the reason I tried to deal with those physical aspects of sculpture at this point. Now I have a little method, since I still don't know what I'm doing, but at least I have something like a little method how to make a sculpture. So I do what I did in the very beginning as a student. I'm doing actually paper maquettes or models, and very different now is that I'm doing. But this is a different aspect, because there is another change in the work, more towards the human shape or body, and that happens like a few years ago, and that helps me making those little models, because it's clearly for me that I now want to do something that is standing or sitting, something that kind of could have a hand that reaches out, and something that you can relate to with your own body. Before I studied art, when I was 20 or so, still going to school maybe, the first catalog, so I was not even interested in art. Also my family, they were no artists. And so I hadn't even the idea at that point that I would become an artist myself. But I'd seen a museum show. I was in a museum in Berlin, in the African sculpture museum or section of the, they called it in this time even Völkerkunde Museum or something, ethnological museum. And this was the first catalog I bought. It was about there were images of African sculptures. So I had a strong, I liked it always somehow. And And this has to do with cubism somehow. And I think what I like and what you can still see here is that there is the interesting thing is that you, with the African sculptures as well, that you have one momentum, but the one momentum is grabbing contradictory things. It's that something that could be a nose is just like a stick or so. And that is reaching out. So you basically have even three things. You have that what it could mean, like a nose or a leg or so. And then you have the material aspect that is kind of carved or cut in the shape of a leg or nose, kind of, or even at least you have some form there. And then you have the direction. You have like an impulse, like a momentum in space. You know, there are those masks where it's very stark. Those contrasts between the nose is reaching out, or the eyes are even reaching out, even though normally eyes don't stick out. But it also is possible that they stick out as sticks. And then you have the mouth or the nose. They're retreating in a way. And you have a very stark contrast, but in the same moment, it's a face or it's a head, and it comes together both as one momentum in a way, one almost like a signal. And this is what for me was very interesting, that you have not only something that resembles you of something else, of a figure or a head. Have also this very clear and simple geometrical normally shape that is kind of sticking out or going in the other direction, and that both is coming together. It means something, but it's also its own material momentum that I think I was always interested in, even before I started to study art. I think the African sculptures showed the European artists a lot about space, and that because before I think the European art was about this entity. You have a closed thing, and you have the front side, the back side, and stuff, and it's like an undoubt or unquestioned entity somehow, kind of. You know. There were artists like Degas who questioned it already beforehand in a different way, but in general, you can say there was this European idea of an entity, which was then, seeing at the African sculptures, was questioned a lot then. It fell apart. This idea of a whole fell apart, and the African sculptors showed the Europeans that there are conflicting, contradictory aspects within one sculptures, and they were able to bring them together. You know, and I think the European artist then, Picasso, tried to do that with the means of painting first, but also he did sculptures in this direction to kind of understand what they did, you know, and what the Africans did. The connection between the paper and the sheet metal is something interesting for me, and then also the sharpness of the metal. It is hard, and also, but when it's thin, then it's also has some clarity, and it's sharp, but it's not much more than you need to show something. You know, it doesn't. It retreats in a way. Also, it tells you, it shows you a form. And it's also a physical form, but then it retreats in a way because it's not so much into your face, like compared to a clay, for example. That it always, with that wobbly surface, would be always in your somehow apparent, you know, as a material. And here, the material is cut out. It's kind of abstract. It's almost like a drawing in space somehow. You know, it's like a three-dimensional drawing. The shape, it tells you, it reveals something, but it also retreats as a material again, and it allows you to enter your imagination easily. I have the feeling it could be the idea of a sculpture. So you have this immaterial aspect around, and this has to do, I think, with the sheet metal, also with that it's thinner and that it's kind of sharp, and it retreats then at one point also. It would be very different to do like a figure out of clay, for example, and mold it. Here it's also, and that is the connection to the constructivism maybe, or the African sculptures. You have something that is maybe meant to be a head, but it's only like a tube. It's only a geometrical shape in a way, and it's kind of in between. In that moment where it shows you it's an arm reaching out, those are fingers or so, but they only cut out shapes somehow, like a Matisse paper cut out or so. So it has this, on the one hand, this lightweightness, which you said, and then on the other hand, it's still one arm that is reaching out, and I like when it comes together. And but for me, I think it would be unbearable to do really a figure with an arm that is reaching out. Like really, I couldn't do that, I guess. So I'm very happy that you can deal with in a playful way with those topics, and it has this aspect of a suggestion of an arm. I need this idea that you suggest something, and it's clear what you are indicating, but it's also clear that you are indicating it, and you don't want to penetrate the world with that idea of you. And I like this idea, that aspect of playfulness, that it could be a model, a suggestion, and as well. But it still should be clear what it is about somehow. Yeah, I think that is relatively new, that I clearly, that you, when you see the sculpture of mine, that you clearly see, okay, that is a figure, obviously, something is not somebody, but there is someone sitting apparently, or you have something that is obviously should be an arm, and you see that in the first moment, and that was not the case with my sculptures before. You've seen it more before, in earlier times you've seen it more abstract. And so that is a change, that is new in a way, that's only since a few years. And very new is now, I did only one sculpture or two sculptures in the last show, like 2 months ago, where I painted afterwards on top of the sculpture, which I never did before. And it wasn't possible before. When you have an abstract sculpture with a bunch of shapes and you add paint on it, different colors, it's getting even more confusing. You have a bunch going on and you don't know why. But here I'm relatively clear about that, what I wanted to do. Like somebody's reaching out his hand, for example, somehow. And so then it gives me, and this is also visible, obvious, and so it gives me a chance to paint on it and add a certain feeling. So what you see in the end is not necessarily, you still see the screws and stuff, but the impression that whole thing has is created a lot also by the paint and painting, and it gives a certain character now, I have the feeling, to the sculptures, which was not around before. Before it looked more abstract, it looked more clearly made, in a way more simple as a fact, and now we have the simplicity of the fact, but the paint adds an emotional aspect to it. I hope so, at least, and this is what I want to continue in the next years. And this show is actually suddenly it's the first one where almost all sculptures are painted sculptures in a way. time we're living in makes also a lot. You know that I think in the last 10, 20 years, so many things changed in the society, and so drastically, and we don't even know where things end up. But I have the feeling what we called modernism, like 20 years ago, it's getting so arrogant and cynical, and it reveals a destructive aspect so much that on the one hand you have like the physical world reduced to a matter of fact. On the other hand, everything that could be spiritual or that is like an isolated opinion. So you have things are falling totally apart. And I think that is also an effect of modernism and also of a certain arrogance, that they can deal with the world in an abstract way. And I think that is, for me, I don't want to deal with that anymore. And I'm searching more again for that what was there around always, always with the sculpture. And when you look back before all that modern times, and also I think what we need now is not this insisting on these modern ideas because we have them clearly, and I hope that I have them also clearly. I'm carrying them still clearly in the sculptures, but I think we should not insist on that anymore. We're more in a time where we have to ask ourselves what we do with it, and this question you can't solve by referring again and again on these modernist ideas. You have to go back to the fact that you're a human being, and that to the simple truth that you need to breathe and to eat and stuff like that. And I think that is typical for our time, that we need to find a ground again on this basic issues. And I think that plays a role also with the changes of my sculptures. I think so.